Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Wednesday, February 28th, and we are going to be talking some NFL in the first half of the show with the Kansas City Chiefs making some noise in terms of potential moves they're going to make in the offseason. They, of course, are back-to-back champions and are looking to retain as much as they possibly can from that championship nucleus last season and go for the three-peat. Then we're going to be talking about the NFL Players Association, which just released this year's second annual report cards for NFL franchises, and I will be giving my biggest takeaways from those grades. Then in the second half of the show, we will be talking about some of last night's NBA games before finishing off the show with the news that the NBA is potentially looking to make some rule changes that would counteract the historic levels of offense that we have seen sort of be a trend in the league for the past handful of seasons. But before we get into everything, just a reminder to like and follow wherever you may be watching us today. And if any of our live viewers would be so kind to leave a tip or donation, the link is streaming across the bottom ticker. That is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. Anything is greatly appreciated. And without further ado, our first segment for today is the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, initially, when I had put together what I was talking about for this segment, it was reported that the Chiefs had franchise tagged cornerback L'Jarius Sneed. Now, they are still expected to, but that was actually a false report. It has not officially been done so just yet. So Sneed is still currently a free agent, but things seem to be headed in the direction of them using the franchise tag on Sneed, trying to work out first a long-term contract with Chris Jones, and then they will circle back to Sneed and this situation afterwards. So Sneed has been their lockdown cornerback for the past few seasons, was once a fourth-round pick and really blossomed into a star for them. He notably made the big play in the second half of the AFC Championship game where he punched the ball loose from Zay Flowers, forced a fumble on the goal line that really changed the direction of that AFC Championship game. Now, should he get franchise tagged, this will not guarantee that he will be back for the Chiefs next season. The Chiefs would obviously like him back, and they, of course, don't want to let him walk for nothing. But should they decide to use the tag on him, this, like I mentioned, does not guarantee anything. ESPN's Jeremy Fowler reported yesterday that the team and Sneed communicated and said that, quote, they are prepared to use the franchise tag and are open to consummate a trade-off if no long-term deal is reached. Fowler added that Sneed was on board for this arrangement and that he can speak to other teams about a sort of free agent-ish style arrangement, but nothing would be guaranteed. He would be under the control of the Kansas City Chiefs, and again, they would not let him walk for nothing. Now, in terms of getting a long-term deal done, that is currently sort of next priority after the Chiefs are primarily looking to re-sign Chris Jones and bringing him back for next season. I think that this is sort of the right sequence of events for the Chiefs here. Jones is the premier player at his position, really, at this point, and it seems as if he means so much to that locker room, to the culture there in Kansas City. you have to do what you can to bring him back if you are the Chiefs, and that's what the Chiefs general manager and owners said, that it is at the top of their to-do list for the offseason. Now, Sneed himself is a tremendous player that they talked about. They do really want to have him back. But Sneed went on national TV. He said that his personal priority is to get paid. He would also prefer it to be with the Chiefs, but he also went on the Up and Adams show and said that he didn't think the Chiefs were going to have enough money to bring back Chris Jones and himself. Now, this interview that he did on the Up and Adams show was a couple weeks ago, and since then we've seen the salary cap increase by over $30 million. Now, it's interesting to sort of see how this jump in the salary cap space is going to play out, because of the fact that, yes, teams have more money. I specifically think it does help a lot of these championship contending teams that have a lot of pieces that they are trying to hold on to. But because the cap space jumped, as a result, we are very likely to see players cost more. Agents understand the dynamics of, it's not like all of these salaries will sort of stay base. It's why we see quarterback contracts get more and more expensive as the years come on. It's because that is accounting for the fact that teams are going to have more money to spend. Now, in this case, I guess we will sort of see. I do think that this could help, but that also leaves some of these other franchises, for Sneed and for Chris Jones, that other franchises could come in with a bigger offer and try and steal them away from the Chiefs. Again, if the Chiefs franchise tag L'Jarius Sneed, then that becomes off of the table in terms of another franchise being able to just snatch him up for nothing. But for Chris Jones, who he was a little bit intoxicated during the Chiefs Super Bowl parade, and he seems pretty determined to come back to Kansas City to make another run at a Super Bowl and to, I mean, at this point, really go down as an all-time Chiefs legend, which he very much so has the chance to do. But if he is an unrestricted free agent, there are going to be other teams with more salary cap room than the Chiefs do, and it's just going to be definitely interesting to see how this all plays out. Again, this was initially reported that the franchise tag was done for Sneed. Now that that's not the case, again, they are expected to, but perhaps the Chiefs would go with a franchise tag for Chris Jones to make sure that he doesn't leave the building. Now, in my opinion, that would be quite a heavy price to pay for a very temporary option. Of course, they could work out a long-term deal, but that didn't go well for them last season. And the franchise tag alone for Chris Jones would be upwards of $32 million. So there's definitely a lot of pros and cons when it comes to being able to try and have the perfect situation and bring everybody back. And that's why we see in the NFL so much these teams that reach the heights of a Super Bowl struggle to stay at that top tier level, because there are a lot of moving pieces. And once you show that you can do things on the biggest stage, everybody else on the league is on notice and is going to try and do what they can as well to snatch them up from the champs. As far as Sneed in this situation, should the franchise tag go through, that would be $19.8 million for the 2024 season, which is a pretty reasonable price for Sneed here. I was actually surprised that he hasn't made an all-pro team in his career just yet, but I think that he is still incredibly accomplished. He has been one of the best cornerbacks of the past couple seasons. Maybe didn't have quite the regular season that he had in 2023, but still a tremendous player and still is absolutely worth the money. There is still a lot to be determined on this subject, and we will have more of an idea of how this is all going to play out as Chris Jones and the Chiefs begin to negotiate a contract, because that's really the first domino for the Chiefs in their offseason plans. I would imagine that they are going to do everything they can to get this deal done, but it is, of course, worth noting the fact that they were unable to come to terms on a deal during the offseason last year. Chris Jones, of course, sat out their season opener against the Lions. Him and it's Brett Veach, I believe, is the general manager of the Kansas City Chiefs, and they had a good conversation supposedly and were able to get that sort of incentivized deal done right after. It is Brett Veach, and he's made it very clear of his intentions, and I think that Chris Jones understands the level of importance he has to that organization, which is also a little bit of a means for them being able to force the Chiefs' hand a little bit, because this is probably the last big-time payday for Chris Jones. He's in his late 20s. Now, that doesn't mean it's his last contract necessarily, but while he's at the prime of his powers, this is the year for him to really cash in on the talent before going into the later years of his career. Jones had another dominant year, another all-pro season, and specifically was the real leader on this defense that, for the most part, carried them to the Super Bowl, where we saw the offense take a step back this year with all of the concerns with wide receivers, and it was the defensive identity that was able to carry the workload for the Chiefs, get them in the position that they were in to win a lot of these big games, and Chris Jones absolutely deserves a ton of credit for all of this. So, additionally, with the Chiefs trying to retain their nucleus as much as possible, they are working on a contract extension for Andy Reid to bring him back. It is expected that this may be the highest paid head coaching deal in NFL history. Before the Super Bowl, there was maybe a little bit of buzz about the idea of Reid possibly retiring, but I think more likely than not, it was more so just drama that was being built up for the big game, as we were talking about that for 2 weeks. Also, possibly from the side of Andy Reid, where he never necessarily denied the idea of going into retirement. Maybe it was a little bit of an early chess move to get the Chiefs to come with a little bit extra money when it did come time for them to come to an extension. But one way or another, whatever they do pay him, it is going to be worth it for Andy Reid. As we know, one of 5 head coaches in NFL history to win 3 Super Bowls. He is second all-time in postseason wins for a head coach, just behind Belichick. And he's devised the perfect scheme to help maximize the talent of Patrick Mahomes. And all these years later, of course, it is easy to look at the fact that Mahomes is an all-timer. If he were to retire today, he is a first-ballot Hall of Famer. But his career could have looked very different had these two not met early in Mahomes' career. Mahomes was a lot more raw, and he was far from seen as a generational talent entering his draft class. And if he went somewhere with some more incompetence in that front office, who knows, maybe things are different. I know that a lot of Bears fans look back on that. I believe it was the 2017 draft where they end up trading up for Mitchell Trubisky. Mahomes falls to the Chiefs, who also traded up for that pick as well. But I don't think that we still get the same version of Mahomes we have today if he started his career with Matt Nagy in that dysfunctional Bears organization. And, at the end of the day, this is all hypothetical and it's not really worth diving into all that much. But I do think that Andy Reid was the perfect landing spot, the perfect mentor for Patrick Mahomes, who just found a way to bring it out of Mahomes, helped him mature to the point where he is today. And, at this point, Reid is going to be turning 66 before next season starts. I think that he has a handful more years likely ahead of him. And, the league has been trending towards these younger coaching staffs, but I think that Reid has clearly showed that he continues to be innovative and be able to make the most of the situation. I expect him to be there in Kansas City for a handful more years. One other quick note before we go to break here. The Chiefs did officially make another move this morning. That was the releasing of receiver Marquez Valdes-Scantling. They saved $12 million in the cap as a result of this. So again, another move that could potentially help them bring back both of these defensive players in Sneed and Jones. But it was not the best season for Marquez, but he had the notable drop at the end of the Eagles game in that fourth quarter, which caused all kinds of outrage around the Chiefs and the fact that they can't be a legitimate contender. At that point, they were definitely struggling, and their receiver situation was really brutal. MVS was a little bit of the highlight of that because of that drop, and he had himself a down year, but had a nice little redemption arc down the stretch in the postseason. He had a touchdown in the Super Bowl. He had the dagger catch in the AFC Championship game, the first down on a third down play where the Chiefs were then able to kneel it out. So what's next for the Chiefs receiver room? Mecole Hardman and Richie James are both going to be free agents this offseason. He's under contract, but I kind of can't imagine Kadarius Toney coming back after all the drama that took place in those last few weeks of the postseason. That likely just leaves Rashee Rice, Sky Moore, Justin Watson, and Justin Ross as the sole people left in that receiver room. Based off of the money they're going to have to give out to some of these defenders, I don't think they're going to be able to go out in free agency and spend big on a veteran. Some people have thrown out the idea of Mike Evans going to the Chiefs. I don't see it financially. If Evans was willing to take a significant pay cut, perhaps, but that will all sort of be played out as we see here. I think that for them, there's tons of talent in this upcoming draft class in terms of receivers. So between day one and day two picks, they could definitely find themselves another running mate along with Rashee Rice. And you have Patrick Mahomes. Clearly, this is a little bit of the rule that we've seen is the fact that he can elevate guys to another level when it comes to needing it. You still have Kelsey on the roster. Is he going to be the regular season monster that he's been in the past? Probably not, but he's still going to be the security blanket in the postseason. You just need some other running mates to help you get through the regular season. I really liked how Rashee Rice developed over the course of the year, so I think he is due for a big sophomore season. And I do think it would be helpful if they could go out and get a veteran, but it's maybe not necessarily an entire necessity, especially depending on what their spending price is. You have Sneed, you have Jones, you also have two starting linebackers becoming free agents in Willie Gay and Drew Tranquill. So there is a lot going on here for the Chiefs, and we will have to sit back and watch to see how they operate this over the course of the next few months. But on that note, we are going to be taking our first break. When we come back on the other side, we will be diving into the report cards that were given out to NFL franchises. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just finished up talking about the Chiefs. They're somewhat busy morning in terms of some transactional moves. Now we are going to be moving on to the report that just came out within the past couple hours about the report cards that were given out to NFL franchises. This is the second annual iteration of this exercise that has been conducted by the NFL Players Association in terms of having their players grade the franchises on a handful of different elements. This year, the different list of categories that teams were graded on, if we can look here, it included head coaches, owners, travel, strength coaches, weight room, training staff, training room, locker room, nutritionist and dietitians, food and cafeteria, and the treatment of families. So they were asked to, the players that is, were asked to grade their team on all of these different categories, and they got over 1,700 players to participate. So a pretty big sample size here in terms of the, reliability of a lot of these things. And it's just interesting to see how teams were graded in this. The Dolphins and the Vikings in back-to-back years now have finished in the top two. Last year was the Vikings 1 and the Dolphins 2. This year it was the Dolphins coming out on top. So a quick run-through of the top 10 teams. This is based on the overall report, the overall grades, I should say, that they got. Dolphins 1, and then it was Vikings, Packers, Eagles, Jaguars, 49ers, Texans, Giants, Raiders, and Bears. Quickly on the bottom 5 teams, it was the Steelers at number 28, Patriots at 29, Chargers, Chiefs, and the Commanders finished in last place for the second consecutive year. But the Chiefs being number 31 on this list was very surprising to me. The survey this year included head coaching, which was not on the list last year. It is supposedly one of the more heavily weighted categories, and despite Andy Reid finishing with an A+, that was their only category that they had above a C+. Their Chiefs, their owner, Clark Hunt, was ranked last in the NFL in terms of owners. He got a grade of an F-. This is likely because of the way that the players view the owner's willingness to enhance the facilities. Interesting. Shout out to David Tepper, who was the most notorious owner, I feel like, during the regular season this year because of his management style. And then there was the instance he threw a drink at a fan after the Panthers were having a horrendous year as a whole. But he did not come in last this year. He was 28th in the league with a D, so not good, but I thought it was going to be worse. Clark Hunt, I should say, coming out on the bottom of this is very surprising to me, just because of the fact that the Chiefs being back-to-back champions, you would expect that they would have more than enough money as an organization to invest into their facilities and everything along those lines. But the Chiefs were 31st in training room, 32nd in training staff. That is just on par with the Washington Commanders, who, like I mentioned, finished last in overall grades in the second consecutive year. And the Commanders, who, let's face it, have been a mess for the past handful of years. We will get more so into them specifically. But sticking with the Chiefs here, they were also 31st in nutritionist/dietitian and 26th in food and cafeteria. They also had an F in the locker room. Again, just very surprising to me, given how much value this franchise has had over the past few seasons, and to be this bad is just very surprising in my eyes. Supposedly, ownership promised renovations to the locker room following the 2022 season, and it just never happened. Some other teams that had significant issues were the Bengals and the Commanders. The Bengals finished outside of the bottom five. They were number 26, but they largely benefited as well from the head coaching category, as Zach Taylor got a grade of an A. But both the Bengals and Commanders were the only two teams in the league to receive multiple F minuses. The Bengals had an F minus for treatment of families, food and cafeteria, and nutritionist/dietitian. The Commanders were F minus in the treatment of families as well, the training room and the locker room. They also had an F in training staff and travel. What's, I guess, a little bit of a positive here for the Commanders is they obviously were just bought after Dan Snyder, who was, infamous in his own right. He sold the team last offseason, and Josh Harris bought it. The ownership for Washington was a B this year, which is a, big step in the right direction for them, as I think that Josh Harris is a much more reliable owner, and I would imagine that in turn here, he is going to look at this, and this was just his first season, and try and build off of some of these things in order to, change the reputation of the Washington franchise that has been scrutinized for a while now. So could potentially see some positive things come out of this. Some interesting ownership grades on the note of Josh Harris and the Commanders. The Chiefs obviously had an F minus, but the Steelers also received an F, one of these historic franchises that you expect would, be more so on the upper end of a category like this. Not that I think they have been, the premier of the league for the past handful of years, but to be an F was definitely catching me off guard. The Patriots received a D+ with Robert Kraft. Things obviously soured in New England when the Patriots had a disastrous year this year, and ultimately the organization decided it was time to part ways between them and legendary head coach Bill Belichick. Belichick, though, got a B- in these head coaching grades, and there were definitely parts of the locker room that were lost on Bill Belichick and had, fallen out of, I wouldn't even say fallen out of love with the process, because it's not like a lot of these guys were there for the dynasty years in New England, but definitely there was not quite as much faith in the way that the team was being run, and it clearly, in the players' eyes, did not fall quite as much on Belichick as I think that Kraft probably would have preferred. And I agreed with the decision to move on from Belichick. I think that having him in terms of personnel was growing to be a little bit problematic. I think as his best prime years were sort of passing him. I still think that he's a great coach. I think that it's a little bit crazy that he is not going to be coaching somewhere this season, but depending on the power structure and how much he wanted, I can at least understand that. But I think that these reports coming out sort of put pressure on Robert Kraft, who, in his eyes, he sort of can do no wrong. It was Belichick pushing Brady out. It was Belichick hiring all of the bad coaches, ruining Mac Jones, all of that. Again, I'm not even saying I fully disagree, but the players aren't necessarily bought into him. He is currently releasing a docu-series on Apple Plus called The Dynasty, talking about the Patriots' years of dominance. And now I think that he has a little bit more to prove here. Jerry Jones notably got a B. Not bad, not great, but I feel like pretty on par for what Jerry Jones, as controversial as he can be at times, especially with his management strategy, still ends up getting a decent grade in this situation, as the Cowboys are thinking of going all in this offseason. The biggest improvements, far and away, came from Jacksonville. During these surveys last year, they were exposed for having rats in their facilities, and they made a significant jump from 28th to 5th this year. They opened up a new facility, and at least in the eyes of their players, the conditions were clearly improved. Last year, they had a D+ or lower in training room, locker room, weight room, and nutrition. This year, they had at least a B- in every category other than the treatment of families, which did also improve at least marginally from an F last season to a D this year. Overall, I think that this is a really effective exercise for, the NFL Players Association to hold, because it keeps franchises accountable. We obviously scrutinize the players and the coaches that are on the team so much throughout the course of the year that there is some level of what goes behind the scenes that we don't really get an opportunity as fans to get any sort of a perspective on. And I do think that this is a good way to look at that. And, if you take some of these individual instances, such as the Commanders, on the outside, the Commanders look like a mess. The report card here also does sort of reinforce that idea. But then you also have instances like a Jaguars, who haven't really been a premier franchise, but you've seen them make a lot of moves over the past handful of years to sort of revamp themselves. And as a result, we have, seen the way that they have increased in these types of standings. I'm curious as the years go on, especially like right now, the Broncos sit at 16. The interviews and such took place earlier in the season. For example, the Raiders gave Josh McDaniels the lowest head coaching grade in the league. He was given a D, but that's because it was taking place while McDaniels was still in charge of the team. If this were done towards the end of the season, I think that Antonio Pierce would have brought that grade up. But that was just not the case quite yet. So I think that there is a lot of interesting stuff that can come out of this. And, I just think that as an NFL fan, we should all sort of want the organizations to be set an example for every other organization, for my job, for your job, of being held accountable and the way that, we can actually see these multi-million, billion-dollar organizations, be put on blast a little bit at times. Not that this exercise is about exposing anyone. The way that the director of this survey phrased it, it was more so about highlighting the good in a lot of these organizations while also showing room for improvement with others. I think that over time, you would think that we would see these grades gradually come up and be a little bit better of a standard for all organization in terms of work conditions and everything along those lines. Am I being a little optimistic? Possibly, but just a thought. And on that note, we are going to be taking our second break. When we come back on the other side, we will be switching more so into basketball. So stick with us. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We will be getting into our third segment here, talking about last night's NBA games. The conversation has to start with the wild one that took place between the Dallas Mavericks and the Cleveland Cavaliers. One of the best games of the season. The Cavs won 121-119 on a Strus buzzer beater from behind the half-court line. So, to sort of set the stage here, Strus was a hero for the Cavs in the fourth quarter. They were down by 10 points with 3:42 left in regulation, and Strus went on a historic heat check where over the course of 67 seconds, Strus went 4 for 4 from 3 to catapult them back into the game. And it was just incredible to see. That from star players to role players, you don't see that level of getting hot really ever. That was, obviously, stakes are different, but that was a little bit of Reggie Miller, Penny Hardaway, that level of getting hot at the right time. It was incredible to see. From that point, it was Donovan Mitchell knocking down a couple of threes, including a step back that banked in for the Cavs to put them up by 3 points with 29 seconds left. The Mavs responded quickly as Kyrie got a floater to go, and then we just saw some pandemonium down the stretch in this game. The Cavs inbounded the ball. Darius Garland had the ball. He was hounded. Josh Green got in on the play. Maybe dragged him down a little bit, but also, it could have gone either way. I agreed with the no call. I was listening, I think at the time it was the Mavericks broadcast, where they were saying Garland should have been called for a travel. It also could have been a foul. I just think the play on, whatever, let it be. But the Cavs end up calling a timeout as a result of that play, which was their last of the game. So they are inbounding now with a 1-point lead, and they throw it away. It was Mobley looking for Strus. Derrick Jones Jr. got involved in the play, made the catch difficult. It was pretty bad spacing from the Cavs there. Garland and his defender were right next to it as well. But it goes out on the Cavs. The Mavericks take over with 8 seconds left, still down by 1. It was Maxi Kleber inbounding it. He throws it in. Mobley tips it up in the air. Luka does a phenomenal job of coming back to the ball, tracking it down, driving into the paint, and then throwing a no-look bounce pass down to PJ Washington, who gets a tough layup to go over the top of Jarrett Allen. So at that point now, 2.1 seconds left. Mavericks take the lead. There are no timeouts because the Cavs just burned their last one, and it was Strus drilling the half-court bomb, officially listed as a 59-footer. This was the second longest game winner in the three-point era, according to Basketball Reference. So just an unreal ending. The game was great, the back and forth there. We saw Luka getting extremely hot in the second quarter, and he just had a masterful performance as a whole with 45 points. It was Donovan Mitchell who led the Cavs in scoring in this game, 31 points on 11 of 20 shooting, 7 of 11 from 3. But the story was about Max Strus in his fourth quarter. 21 points, shot 7 of 10 from 3. So unbelievable stuff there. Luka and Kyrie combined for 75 points in this one, and they still lost. So the cards just may not have been in their favor for this game, especially with some of the shots that the Cavs were knocking down. Again, an all-time heat check from Strus. That Mitchell shot to put them up with 3 with under a minute left was crazy. And the Cavs shot 20 of 40 from the three-point line. So 50%, it's very rare you are going to win a matchup when the other team is doing something like that. I do think there is something to the fact that they added size at the deadline. I think that they've gotten a lot better as a post defense, which is a big thing when you look at the Western Conference and some of the other competitors, the types of size that they have. But I do worry about the perimeter defense a little bit. Again, 20 of 40 there's not much you can do about that. And I didn't think that it was necessarily, extremely open shots, especially down the stretch that the Mavericks were allowing. But that is something that I'm just sort of monitoring. It's 50% a little bit of an aberration. Last thought here is, great job by the Cavs to shoot that, but they still haven't looked great as of late. They are 3-3 in their last 6. It was this weird dynamic, I feel like, for a bit there, where I wasn't talking about the Cavs. I saw what they were doing, and I was sort of waiting for the right time to talk about it, but I still just don't really consider them to be championship contenders. And I think they are a very interesting situation here where I do still feel like they're a little bit redundant between their two guards and their two big men. And, Donovan Mitchell can be somebody that can get extremely hot. I think that they have, found some resolution there at the forward spot this year, where last year they were playing, I think they were playing Danny Green at one point in the playoffs, starting him at the small forward position. They were really struggling there. I think Okoro's been marginally better for them. LeVert is solid, and Max Strus, who was not good in the playoffs last year for the Heat necessarily, but, I think they have some more options there, so we'll see, but I still have them outside of that contender tier, in my opinion. Next game, the 76ers and the Celtics. The Celtics come out on top 117-99. The Sixers kept it close for a lot of the game. They made a run at the Celtics early in the fourth quarter, but it was Tatum turning it on down the stretch and helping power them to the win. He scored 14 points in the fourth quarter. He finished with 29, 11, and 8. My big takeaway from the game is the fact that we are seeing this Celtics team be able to win in ways other than just relying on the three-pointer. And that has been a big concern for them over the course of the past couple seasons, especially since Mazzulla has taken over. He's faced a lot of credit in terms of people thinking that the Celtics are shooting too many threes. Well, now we see them have a really bad night from outside last night, and yet they were able to get it done. This is a team that is first in three-pointers attempted and three-pointers made per game. Last night they shot 5 of 22, and yet it was them dominating the glass and the paint that was the reason they were able to win this game. They out-rebounded the Sixers 56-28, and in the first half, they were allowing the Sixers to grab too many offensive rebounds that was leading to second chance opportunities, and you saw Mazzulla getting really upset with the team. Once they were able to limit Philly's a second chance offense, they really started to take control of this game. They scored 64 points in the paint in this one, and the other thing they did, which is big for them, was get to the free throw line. They haven't been great at it this season. They're pretty middle of the pack. They attempt 21.7 free throws attempt per game. That was at least the numbers going into this game. They shot 37 and hit 34 of them. So again, I just think that the flexibility of this team of actually being able to win in other ways than just relying on the three-point line is big. Now, does this necessarily happen against a fully healthy Knicks team that won't allow you to get 64 points in the paint? Probably. But still, I think to not just keep chucking from three, but to find other ways to get baskets was such a huge thing for them. Brown and Tatum both made comments after the game about being able to win without hitting the three and how they thought that it was a step of maturity with them. Joe Mazzulla called it one of their best games of the season because of the lack of knocking down threes and coming out on top. And the Celtics just got it done on both ends to close this one out against, again, a Philly team that is down Joel Embiid and are definitely struggling to stay in the picture here. But again, I don't think that it's a matter of who they beat, but I think it's how they won that is most impressive for the Celtics in this one. In another sort of not about who they beat, but how they won is the Milwaukee Bucks picking up another dominant win. Now, this was against an even worse opponent in the Charlotte Hornets, who they just slaughtered from the jump. They held the Hornets to just 26 points in the first half. They had them doubled. They had 58 at the break. The Hornets are not a very good team. I did give them some credit last week when they started 4-0 after their deadline acquisitions came into play, but have now had back-to-back brutal offensive performances after a bad loss. Again, not to the competition level, but the lack of offense that came to play against the Warriors over the weekend. And, you know, just for the Bucks here, again, it's not about the team that they beat, but the defense was such a concern with this organization through their early stretch of the season. They held opponents to under 100 points just once through the first 52 games of the season. They've now done so in 4 of the past 7 games. So a positive step for them. Some of the guys were sort of reflecting after the game, talking about they got to head into the All-Star break, sort of take a moment to just settle down, and they've come out looking really good since then and have another dominant win. They took over Philly over the weekend as well on Sunday. So despite maybe some comments from Dame that have taken place the past couple days, which is a little bit weird, I think that, you know, the way that the team is playing at least is absolutely headed in the right direction, and they can work themselves into being more of a legitimate contender as long as everybody's on board. Again, that Lillard situation is going to be something to monitor just a little bit at least. But elsewhere in the NBA, the last game that I really have notes on is the Warriors and Wizards game, where Chris Paul, he returned from injury in this one. He had missed the last 21 games with a fractured hand. He played 22 minutes in his game back, finished with 9, 6, and 4, and had 4 steals as well. Specifically, he was part of the run where the Warriors sort of took control of this game, where early in the second quarter, they were actually down, and they went on, it was something along the lines of a 19-4 run when it all wrapped up, where Chris Paul was helping, being a key distributor in that moment, and the Warriors controlled the game from that point out. They had a 23-point lead entering the fourth quarter after a dominant third quarter. The Wizards did get it down to 11 points with a few minutes left, but they ultimately, I didn't think that there was that much of a chance that we were going to see a real comeback in this one. Warriors took their foot off the gas a little bit after leading big time. I mean, their starters were still in down the stretch of that game during that run where the Wizards made it closer, but they just didn't have at that point the offensive firepower, the Wizards this is, to be able to pull off that comeback in the end. Chris Paul came off the bench. It's what he had been doing for the majority of the season when he was healthy earlier on. Now, though, he has a little bit of a running mate coming off the bench with him. That is Klay Thompson. So this is going to be interesting to see. I'm specifically going to be looking at the substitution patterns to see, if they are coming in together off of the bench in that first thing. Are they sticking together? How much is Klay Thompson or Chris Paul playing in those clutch minutes? I think that there's a lot that goes into this that I feel like I'm going to have to sort of more closely analyze. But, you have two future Hall of Famers coming off of the bench together. As much as I feel like I had turned the page on the Warriors, and I still am not willing to quite revert, especially not after a win against the Washington Wizards, I think that it's definitely going to be a team that has some eyes on them down the stretch of the year and could potentially prove a lot of people, including myself, wrong. They are now 6-1 with Klay coming off of the bench. Klay's had his ups and his downs during this stretch as well, but ultimately they have been winning games, and whether that's because of the fact that Klay Thompson is coming off the bench himself or the fact that we are seeing key contributions from these young guys. Draymond Green has been really impactful for them since returning from suspension. All of that sort of boils into this as we see the Warriors, also another team that was a sleeping giant, sort of rear its head into looking more and more like a playoff team by the day. The last thing I'll say on this game and on last night's games is that this was Jordan Poole's return to Golden State, and really struggled from the field. You have to feel for Jordan Poole a little bit in this one. I do still feel like there is a level of talent that's there, but I was actually wrong. This game took place in Washington, so I made that last part up in terms of the return, but at least playing his former team, and really struggled from the floor again. Shot just 5 of 17. That's all I'm going to leave it at for there, because I think at this point, the Jordan Poole storyline, I want to see him do well, even though he's somebody that crushed my dreams a little bit in the 2022 finals as a Celtics fan. I think that there's too much talent to just go to waste there, and I hope that he turns things around. But on that note, we are going to be taking our final break. When we come back, we will be wrapping up with some more NBA talk, specifically a little bit of big picture stuff that has come out over the past couple days in terms of the NBA's competition committee potentially looking into trying to find ways to even out the game a little bit more between offense and defense. So stick with us. We will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We are heading into our final segment of the day, talking about the NBA considering to make some changes in order to help the defense. Now, this has been a storyline around the league. Specifically, it started popping up around the time that we saw some of these historic individual offensive performances, such as Joel Embiid and Karl Anthony Towns, both scoring over 60 points in the same night. And then just a few days later, Luka Doncic scoring 70 against the Hawks to join Embiid in the 70-point club. And it's been no secret that year after year, we have seen the offenses get, exceptionally better. We're seeing all-time high offensive efficiencies year after year. The league has broken the offensive efficiency record in 6 of the last 8 seasons. There are some interesting numbers if you go back and look at that 2016-17 Warriors team and for how much of a juggernaut they were. If you would put them in today's NBA, they would be outside of the top 10, I believe it is, with offensive efficiencies in the league. So all of it is just, it's been crazy, and it's led to a lot of different people spouting off different takes. A lot of people are complaining about the lack of defense in the NBA. I personally don't see it that way. I don't think it's for a lack of effort, but I think that there are a handful of things. First being, I think that the league is at an all-time high in terms of talent, specifically on the offensive end, that there's just not much you can do. You can play perfect defense on a Luka Doncic, on a Steph Curry, but if they are feeling themselves, they're going to hit the shot, and there's just not much you can do about it at all. So I think that's a factor. I think that additionally, we saw the getting rid of hand checking, which is, of course, another a little bit of a volatile topic in terms of the NBA, where a lot of people feel like it needs to come back. A lot of people are saying it doesn't actually have that much of a factor on the game. I don't know if it's specifically the hand checking, but specifically we see game in, game out. If you watch an NBA game, you will see an NBA player with the ball drive into the lane and do the lowering the shoulder a little bit and then go flying off of the defender, flail a little bit, and get the foul call. The NBA refs support these calls, saying it's by the rules, and that a lot of the time, because of the defender's position, they're putting themselves in a compromising position, and for that reason, it should be a foul. But I feel like for the most part, we as NBA fans, at least myself, I actually don't want to speak for everyone in this one, but if you are an offensive player initiating the contact, I just don't think that it should really be a foul. I think that now there's a handful of players that the way that the rules are put out there's a lot of guys that are very talented at working their way through these rules. James Harden has been a revolutionary in that sense, the way that he has been able to put defenses in compromising positions and take advantage of it. Trae Young, Jalen Brunson, Luka Doncic, these are all guys that are great at it. But, I think that there's just, it feels a little dirty, and not dirty in like an unfair, harmful way. It feels stupid, because that's why a lot of these times with the defenders, it's not for a lack of effort, but there's almost this bubble that a lot of NBA players that are skilled enough on offense have. Joel Embiid's an example of this too, where if you press up anywhere too close to them, they're going to find a way to manipulate the refs in order to get the foul call. And as a result, we see defenders just playing so far back, not daring to come anywhere near to touching the offensive player, that it allows along with how much 3-point shooting there is and the amount of spacing there is in the NBA, then it opens up the lanes more and more, because when a player is driving, you can't actively put yourself onto the players quite as much. And all of this sort of bakes into this issue. There are a handful of other reasons that I haven't even mentioned yet. And there's a ton of different ways to sort of analyze this whole problem issue, if you want to call it that way, because it's also interesting. The NBA does better ratings-wise when there is offense. We saw Chauncey Billups had some interesting comments being asked about this question. He referenced the 2005 finals, I think it was. It was that or 2004, where it was that, I believe it was the Spurs and Pistons finals, where it was just a defensive rock fight, and the ratings for that finals were very low. The NBA benefits a lot from offense because it allows them to put out the social media clips. It impresses the casual viewer more, and it impresses me too. I'm not trying to call anybody who likes offense a casual when it comes to it. It's definitely eye-popping, but I think that there is also a certain level of interest you have to personally have to be extremely impressed with defensive plays, because the highlights aren't necessarily quite as eye-popping as the offensive highlights. So the league has definitely benefited from this offensive revolution over the past handful of years, but the question is, has it gone too far? And that's something that the NBA themselves are looking into. Joe Dumars, who is a Pistons legend, NBA legend in my eyes, he is the current head of basketball operations for the league, and he told people at ESPN that the league is currently looking into whether or not changes need to be put in place in order to counteract the offense and find more of a competitive balance between offense and defense. Now, what exactly this means is still something that they are going to be discussing for the next handful of months. This is if a change is going to be made. It won't be made until this summer, but it is an interesting thought experiment here in terms of what can be done. Because again, I think that the flat out fact is that offensive players and their skills have never been at this level in NBA history. So you can't take the skill away from the offensive player, and we shouldn't want to. But it's what can we do to allow defenses to counteract that a little bit more. A very popular idea has been the idea of outruling the 3-second violation on defense. I forget exactly who it was. It might have been JJ Redick that put this in a historical perspective. So whoever it is, credit to you. But the history of the defensive 3-second was in order to create more spacing, because back in the day, it was everyone sort of packed into the paint. You had a couple big guys on opposite blocks, and it was a very crowded game. This, in turn, had guys forced to sort of open up the painted area and be able to allow offensive players to get to the rim with a little bit more ease. Now we're at a point where, because the spacing is as advanced as it is, and all these rules are put in place where you can't be quite as physical with them on the perimeter, or even as they're driving in, we see a lot more open layups, stuff like that, that is leading to a lot of these possessions that people criticize for a lack of effort on the defensive end by the players, when it goes a little bit deeper than that. So the idea of outruling this 3-second violation has been a very popular idea because of the fact that then, of course there still is the spacing. This would be on the defense's terms to implement, well, how much do we just want to have a guy camping out in the paint, but because of the perimeter. But it allows an opportunity for the defense to have the upper edge when it comes to guarding the paint. And I know that there's also probably a portion of NBA fans that think that we are too much in an era where players are just throwing up three-pointers, which is, partially true to some degree because of the shot making, but I don't think that we would fully get to a point where if you eliminate the 3-second violation, that we're only going to see three-pointers. I think that, again, you can hurt players. We see Rudy Gobert getting pulled out onto the perimeter anyways because of the fact that when you play teams where everybody can shoot, you can't afford to leave anybody open. And, I think that this would be at the caution of the defense to have somebody camped out in the paint, but it is also something that could sort of, mend the gap a little bit. Now, my biggest change I would like to see is this whole idea of who is initiating the contact is getting called for the foul. Because it's one thing when an offensive player is driving. I think, you can allow contact for sure, but I just feel like, and it's not even like the overall free throw numbers in the NBA have increased, like as a whole, because instead we're just seeing, I feel like, a lot of defenders not even make the contact and allowing easier buckets at the rim. So, there's, again, a ton that goes into this, and it's a very interesting debate, and I'm not sure what the immediate fix is, but I at least do like the fact that the NBA is trying to work this out. I personally am a big fan of defenses. I think that finding the schemes and everything is a very, very appealing, draw to me, but it's hard to do so the way that offense is played in the NBA. And with the, again, amount of talent that is across the league. So this is something that, again, there's going to be no immediate action, but I think that if you also look at some of the Olympic and some of the FIBA rules, they do a lot less of the, defensive restrictions that in turn is part of the reason why we see American teams struggle a little bit more when they go overseas, because there are certain things that are allowed over there that are not in the NBA. And I would definitely, if I'm Dumars, if I'm on this committee looking to, balance things out, I would definitely take a look into some of the international rules as well. But on that note, that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Just a reminder to like and follow wherever you may be catching us, and we will be back tomorrow at 2 o'clock, so we will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet.